Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Institute of Health and Social Care Management, and this first in our IHSCM Women in Leadership Open Special Interest Group meeting. It is fantastic that we've finally got to this point. My role today is very limited. I'm simply going to introduce our fabulous panelists. We have Chand Kaur, Claire Mould and Daghni Rajasingam, and the entire event will be expertly chaired, I am sure, by the one and only Mindy Sawhney. Mindy, I'm going to hand straight over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. I wonder, could you travel around with me and do all my intros? That's fantastic. So as John said, really, really delighted to be having this first of our meetings of the Women in Leadership group. As many of you already know, this is an open group, so we'd really warmly encourage both you and your colleagues to participate and to make of it what would be most helpful to all of you. The conversation that so the other thing to say is that we are recording the conversation today, just so you know that. It will be available on the IHSM website for playback. And it will also be available as an unlisted YouTube video, just so you know just where we might end up in terms of our conversation. We'd really encourage all of you to please introduce yourselves in the chat and to make any comments or ask any questions that you have so that they don't fall out of your head. Our intention is to do a little bit of conversation with our panelists to kind of open up the conversation, but then to extend it to everybody who's joining us on the call today. So I'm your chair for this afternoon. My name is Mindy Sawhney. I was previously chair of a small group of care homes, and I am currently a non-executive director at Oxford Health NHS Foundation Trust, where I chair the People and Leadership Committee. I'm going to invite each of my panelists to do a short intro, and then we will move into the conversation. Claire, can I start off with you?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Mould. I'm the director at Carestockroom Strategic, and we provide solutions working with organisations primarily around compassionate leadership and emotional intelligence. And then prior to that, I was CEO of a charity that supported 16 to 18-year-olds with homelessness, and also latterly worked as CEO of a charity that provided residential and community-based support for adults with complex mental health needs and learning disabilities.
Thank you, Claire. Delighted to have you on the call. Chand.
Hi everybody, I am Chand Kaur. I am Chief Executive of a charitable organisation called PCOS Relief. We support females who have been diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, and I'm also Director of Number One Healthcare that supplies services to the NHS as well as the health and social care sector, such as staffing, training and medical procurement.
Doug.
Hi, my name's Daghni Rajasingam. I'm an obstetrician at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital and Deputy Medical Director there, holding leadership development within my portfolio, and I'm Chief Obstetrician for the southeast of England.
Right, thank you. So we've got panellists from a really diverse set of experiences and perspectives. I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation. I guess it's just worth saying at the outset that sometimes for those of us who've been agitating on this topic for a long time, it does feel that it's a mountain that takes an awful lot to move. But it is worth just reflecting that, you know, in 1970, the gender pay gap was 47.6%. And today, the average for women in full-time work is around 13.5%. So in that period of time, we have made significant progress. And it just goes to show that actually action does result in change, but we have to make a concerted effort to do it. So I just kind of wanted to offer that as a little bit of context. It would be useful, I think, to try and understand what is the scale of the challenge in terms of the gender pay gap. And I wonder, Daghni, if I might ask you to say a little bit about that in terms of the NHS. And then Chand, if you might do that for social care, and then we can try and understand. So if that's how big it is, why is it that big? What are the reasons for that? Daghni.
so it's interesting. I'm reflecting on 50 years of us reducing the gender pay gap from the 70s, and whilst that's good, I suppose I am and continue to be impatient for this pay gap to be nullified really in the very near future. And the problem with it is, if I use the example of female medical consultants, there is still a significant pay gap, despite the fact that we do the same job. We're paid, if you're working for the NHS, absolutely the same per 4 hours of work, and yet we have a significant pay gap, because as soon as it becomes something that is differential, that you apply for, that a committee has to decide on, the parameters that are used are discriminatory. So they're sexist and they're racist, and that's why we have the problem that we have. And in talking about gender, I want to also be really clear that when we say generally we're trying to increase the gender representation on a board, the means that we use do not allow us to take into account intersectionality, which I obviously feel very strongly about as a female leader and a woman of colour. And I think there are institutional barriers to this. There is probably sexual and racial codifying of how we see and do things that many of us, despite being aware, are probably have accepted subliminally. So I think the scale of the problem is huge. I have two daughters who are 21 and 19, and I very distinctly remember when the 21-year-old was born, I remember thinking, I hope that the workforce generally is much more equal when you enter it. She's about to enter the workforce, and sadly it is much more equal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daghni. Chan, just before I ask you to do the same a little bit for social care, I mean, we know that the workforce, both in health and in social care, is predominantly female. And it is worth saying that actually health and social care do fare better than the general economy in terms of gender pay gap. So while that is generally the case, as I said, about 13.5%, within health and social care, that is somewhere just under 10%. So we're a bit better. But given that we constitute the vast majority of the workforce, we ought to be an awful lot better than we are. Chand, what's the perspective from social care?
I think the perspective of social care is, because 80% of the workforce is driven by females, we tend to forget that there might be the gender pay gap, which there definitely is. Within this sector, females are very much, yes, they are driving and they are leading the sector. However, their senior position really stops at senior managers. There's nothing for them to progress more further, and that's very unfortunate, because then there's no career driven, there's no progression for them as a whole. I did do some research before this meeting, and I did actually find that the average pay for women is 24% less than men within the sector, and that's very unfortunate given that we drive the sector. It's 80% more females in the sector. However, females are paid 24% less than men, and it's very unfortunate. It's 20% overall less for females who are raising a family. So again, they are disadvantaged. So you have this scale where, yes, females are the face of the sector. However, they're discriminated and they have the barrier of the gender gap, and that's very unfortunate because we do need females. When I think about the comparison between the NHS and the health and social care, I feel like the NHS are driven by men, because you have the consultant who are men, whether it's women's health as well, you have the consultants, the surgeons who are the men and would be on the higher pay. However, when you look at the NHS, the females are the nurses. You don't tend to see a lot of nurses for men. You see a lot of the nurses driven by females. And again, that's within the health and social care sector. You see the director levels as the men, and then you see the senior management as the females. So there's a massive gap, to be honest, and it's very unfortunate because you give so much to the sector and yet there's so many barriers within. and it reflects, you know, the retention of staffing. It reflects the productivity within the organisation. Now we're seeing as a lot of females are leaving the sector, and that's not obviously good because, again, the gender pay gap. We're not being treated the same for the more work we're doing, if not the same work we're doing.
Thank you. And it's very striking, isn't it, that I think there's an additional complexity in social care because of the ownership of those businesses. So I think at least in the NHS, it's very transparent about who is on the board, who is a chief executive, and so on. Whereas in social care, because obviously the majority of social care is in the private sector, it's not quite as easy to discover who is a director, who is a controlling shareholder in those businesses. So there's a kind of an additional level which is not very easy to scrutinise. But in some of the larger social care providers, there has again been some progress in reducing the gender pay gap. But a lot of it seems to be driven, and Daghni, I wonder if this is what you were alluding to as well. A lot of the gender pay gap seems to be driven by the difference in bonuses that are awarded. So, you know, there's a few, for example, at HC1, who have been very concerted about their efforts to eliminate the gender pay gap. There is still a 50% mean gender pay gap in bonuses. Daghni, is that what you were meaning about, even though we're on the same pay scale?
Yes, yes, I am. But there's an additional thing. So our discretionary bonuses, if you could call them bonuses, are our clinical excellence awards. They're very, very biased towards men and towards academics. They've brought in a new system called clinical impact awards, trying to readdress that balance. But again, the criteria that you have to meet are traditionally the leadership positions that women haven't been able to achieve, and therefore they're discriminated against. But there is also something, Mindy, about female consultants. So we do have an almost not quite 50-50 female-male consultant workforce, but women don't tend to ask to be paid for all of the work that they're doing, or are not paid for all of the work that they're doing. They also tend not to do out of hours work, where at the moment you'll all be aware with the elective lists and with the push to get through that work, there's a huge premium that is being paid to get consultants to work on a Saturday and Sunday, and we know that females are underrepresented because they have caring duties because they can't do that. So it then feeds in, this is the systemic bias that I think is really, really difficult to get under. And whilst we say the NHS is transparent, I would challenge that the data is never presented in a way to really highlight what I think Chand was saying as well, is that given the number of women involved and the number of women who are not being paid appropriately compared to their male counterparts, that's a huge sum of money. This system is large and it's complex. That's a huge sum of money, which I find really difficult to justify in this day and age and in a high resource country.
Thank you. So we know this is a big problem, and we also know that despite that huge amount of progress since 1970, it is fair to say that progress has slowed very considerably in the last 5 years, even pre-COVID. So it feels like we are getting to those really sticky things that are more difficult to move. To understand, or have I frozen? Oh, I'm sorry. We started to unpick a little bit about why that gender pay gap exists. And I wonder, Claire, if you could say a little bit about what you see as the factors that contribute to the gender pay gap.
Yes, yeah, happy to, and I think that, you know, I obviously completely concur with everything that Daghni and Chand have said, and having been involved working in health and social care and working very closely with the NHS, when you see this in practice, whilst we are seeing that there is a positive trajectory, we'd all agree that this is now, you know, beginning to level off and actually dip down as we get towards the sharp end. And certainly really sort of picking up on some of the points that have already been made, it is looking at, first of all, I think that there is a risk that there's misrepresentation in the data, because the reality of what's going on isn't always representative of the reality of what's happening. So you might have, if I think of health and social care within care homes, you might have a registered manager that is there that may be female. But Mindy, as you've indicated, you know that it's quite difficult sometimes to know who the owners are. I know I'm currently supporting a care home who have owners who refer to themselves as, I won't name them, but a certain group. And I deal with one of that partnership group who is male, and I'm not privy to knowing who the others are, and actually they're dependent. So when they turn around and say, oh, we have a predominantly female workforce, actually they don't, because it's being driven by, and they're the ones that set the pay right the way throughout the rest of the care homes. And I can categorically say that that registered manager and the people below aren't getting a decent salary. And also I think it's really important to be thinking about looking at the levels of training. So many people who are working at, you know, rolling up the sleeves at grassroots level, the training that they received is very much to do with achieving their jobs, not growing. There's no aspiration of where's the leadership training, where's the management training, where's the opportunities to grow and the confidence to come through with interviews. So when opportunities do come, they're actually so busy putting their heads down and getting on with the job that they're not aware of them. And I know we're going to go on to talk about this next in a little bit more detail. But I think if we are going to think about how we can be more fair and equitable, we've got to be really realistic about what the whole process is, because it might be okay saying, oh, but we have an E&D policy here and we follow this, but then actually seeing what the reality is. Are people, A, having the confidence to go to these jobs, or are they being precluded by going for these opportunities because the nature of what's being put before them, working, having to be flexible 7 days a week, where actually a lot of women aren't in that position to say, I am going to put my flexibility above this. And finally, before we go on, because I know we're going to unpick all of these points, what we need to be thinking about is, where are the inspirational leaders, so the women that are coming up are being aspired to doing this? So are the leaders that are being seen working 7 days a week, always on the end of the phone, always available? So people are thinking, gosh, if I want to go into leadership, that's a sacrifice that I need to have. Or is there a voice coming through that's confident to say, actually, I'm strong enough to be a leader, but you know what, I'm such a good leader, I've delegated my responsibilities, so I can go and do the school run, so I can go and do other responsibilities that I have, and that doesn't reflect badly on me. And it would be really interesting as we unpick, you know, the conversations, to hear what people's views are with regard to who the female inspirational leaders are and what messages they're giving out.
Yeah, it's that old adage, isn't it? It's very difficult to be what you cannot see, and we mustn't underestimate the importance of role modelling, and role modelling flexible ways of approaching leadership, which are not necessarily about being the all-conquering hero 24, who's available 24/7. I'd like us to just try and understand a little bit, you know, is it that women are not applying for these senior roles, or is it that they are applying but they are not being successful in their applications? I'd like us to, it'd be, I think, really fascinating to try and understand the panel's perspective of that. Before I do, though, I thought it would be helpful to share with you the Fawcett Society's view of the 4 primary factors that drive the gender pay gap. So they identify it as, first and foremost, pure discrimination. Although it is illegal, I think most of us have had experience or witnessed discrimination taking place. And there are more than 50,000 women a year who are forced to leave their jobs once they become mothers because they are not able to get their places of work to facilitate those dual roles. So that's one, discrimination. Second, seniority. Women are simply not in those senior jobs, and that's why they are not earning as much as men. Third, that the value of the work that women do is not valued as highly as the work that men do. So you often see that in clinical disciplines. You know, certain types of clinical discipline are more highly valued than others. And fourth, that because women have unequal share of the caring responsibilities at home, they are more often forced into part-time work, where the gender pay gap is significantly bigger. So it's at 18% there. So I thought it'd be useful just to say that those are the 4 factors, the force that society has identified. Chand, what do you think? Is it that women are not putting themselves forward for these jobs, or is it that they are, but they're not successful when they apply?
I think when we look at today's present day, I think women are trying to apply for higher paid jobs and higher roles, because it's the level of work that they have worked and it's the training and the experience they have to allow them to apply for that job. I think we live or we work in a society or where there's stigma, and stigma comes because of lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. There's a lot of lacks to allow somebody to progress. So I do feel females are applying, but there's a stigma about females career driven. Now, if females get ahead of a male, there could be male ego clashes, there could be, male clashes between a male and a female to say, I disagree what this female is doing and what that female is doing. You also have the gender clash as well, which is very unfortunate. So I do feel females are trying to progress in terms of their career. However, I do feel that they are being very lacked, because where they've not had that experience of the senior positions, they're more likely to not get those senior positions, as opposed to somebody, if it was a male who's already got those qualifications or those training or those experiences to allow them to do that job role. And it's very unfortunate because females, again, they've got a barrier because they don't actually know where to go for training. They're not given training, they're not given the resources, they're not given the materials for them to progress, which again is a barrier to themselves, which then stops them to just the senior manager roles. They've done all the roles below the senior manager to get to that position, but nobody's actually given them the resources to then take it forward and progress within themselves. So I do feel in today's day, they are applying for higher paid jobs and higher positions. However, due to the resources, the materials that they're getting, they're very much stuck at where they are.
Thank you, Chand. Daghni, what's your perspective?
So we have the paper that came out 12 years ago, Snowy White Peaks, that looked at people applying for senior management roles within the NHS. And if you were a white male, you were 1.7 times more likely to get the job from the point of being shortlisted. So that's a point at which you have equal qualifications, you've been shortlisted. It should really be a form of ground zero, and it isn't. And within that sub-analysis, I understand that when they looked at women, that was even less likely that you got the job. And again, when you brought in intersectionality and colour, you were less likely. It is a significant problem. And I think something that hasn't allowed us to move forward with this discussion is for us to retrospectively continually question whether people are applying for the job or not. And we wouldn't do that in other situations. So I think we should park that aside. Women are applying for jobs. Women of colour are applying for jobs. They're not getting them. And going back to whether or not they are is this thing where we're just chasing the data when we know there is an inherent systemic toxic problem that we need to start addressing. In terms of how they are encouraged to then get feedback, we know that women get poorer feedback after they're not successful in an interview. We also know that the nepotism that exists within the systems and the institutions that we all work in value either the opinion of men or the work of men much more than that of women. And that is when people are doing equivalent jobs. And until we address that by putting in some really strict and I would say mandatory and legal boundaries, I think we will still be having this conversation 5 years down the line, because you might have policies that don't allow you to discriminate, but the Fawcett Society thing, first of all, that things are just sexist, I think is at the root of a lot of the discussion that we're having. We are still seen slightly differently to our male colleagues, despite the fact that we may be doing the same jobs, or a lot of the time better jobs than they're doing.
Yeah, it is interesting. I noted in the chat comments that somebody said that sometimes members of staff don't realise they're allowed to have leadership training, and it's not something that sort of that they think is for them. And I think that is certainly something that I have observed. But worryingly, and I think this echoes what you're saying, Daghni, is that, for example, in my own trust, we have just disproportionately higher numbers of colleagues from BME backgrounds doing training courses, but they are not as successful as their white counterparts in applying and then gaining those employment opportunities. So there's something about what is the rule of the game? How does it work? Oh, so I need that qualification? Okay, I get that qualification, but I'm still not progressing. So what is it that I am not understanding about how this game is supposed to work? Claire, can I ask you for your sense of it? And then I'd like to open up to all of the colleagues on the call.
Yes, yeah, and I think, I think really I sort of agree with both, obviously with Daghni and Charm, but I think I'm seeing it, out there at two different levels. I think that, yes, on the one hand, more women are applying, and they're not getting them. We've already unpacked some of those, and we're going to unpack it more in the conversations. I feel that one thing that I feel very nervous about is increasing this whole thing that beyond, I don't know if people are familiar with the expression, but beyond the glass ceiling, there's also something now referred to as the glass cliff, that where women do get them, they're set on a precipice for failure, and that's a bit where suddenly people set back and go, well, go on then. And we are seeing an increase in that in the women that are going on to be successful. But I'm also seeing a group of women at the end that are going from that middle management that aren't aspiring to go up to that director level across. It is primarily across sort of health and social care, that aren't going forward, that they're not applying, and there aren't the people there to encourage them to apply, because more often than not across health and social care you've got this sort of pyramid management, and what happens is you've got a manager at the top, and unless they leave or die, there's only one management position within the organisation. And if you speak to an awful lot of people that have worked, and I am talking predominantly in social care, but they say, oh, well, I came here when I was 16 as a pot washer, and then I've moved on and I've always been here. But yes, they've built themselves up, but they've never got to that sort of top of the pyramid. And as has been indicated before, when that position does become free, even if they go for it, somebody externally will apply for it, and they'll say, but you haven't got any registered management experience. And so then what happens is people think, well, that's just, they just sort of stay in their lane and they move forward. And I think this all comes back to the fact of we need to start doing this work, not only at addressing when people are applying at the highest levels, but when people enter the profession, whether that's the NHS or social care, whatever entry they come into, that they need to see themselves to have the aspirations that ultimately their goal is to be a leader. And I know not everybody wants to be a manager leader, but they can still be the very best within the field that they've chosen.
Indeed, indeed. I think it really points to actually something, that pot washer story is one that you hear all the time in social care. And it's one of the things that is really most fantastic about our sector, and indeed in the NHS. I was talking to one of our modern matrons who began as he worked in the delivery rooms first, so there's an amazing kind of career path to be had. But as Charlotte said, and I think this is really, and I think there is research that supports what you're saying there, Charlotte, that men will apply for jobs that they feel that they've got 70% of the requirements list. And a woman is not likely to do that unless she feels she can meet every single one of the requirements that are listed. So worth us having a think about. I'd like to open up the conversation to everybody on the call, and we'd really be intrigued to hear your experiences and perspectives. One of the things that I'm really struck by is the fact of the gender pay gap is not a surprise to any of us, is it? Like, we all know it's there. And I wonder, as somebody asked, I think John asked in the chat, many of us on this call are senior women, and many of us on this call are women who are just coming into the profession. It's wonderful to see so many NHS trainees on the call. It's just fantastic to see. How easy is it for us, whether we're in the senior roles or we're just beginning in our careers, how easy is it for us to highlight, draw attention to the gender pay gap? How easy, have you ever done it? And how did it go? You can either stick your hand up or you can put it in the chat. And just while people are summoning up the courage, maybe Daghni, can I ask if you've done it? If you've done it, and how did it go?
As in juggling, or the less than full time?
No, in the saying, simply calling to attention the fact that there is a gender pay gap, and
yeah,
that the organisation you're in, or we are in, is not paying women as well.
As well, yeah. So sorry, Mindy, I was looking at one of the questions from one of our trainees, and I do want to come back to that. So I call out a lot of things that I didn't used to call out, because I talked a little bit about the racial code, and there is a fabulous book out at the moment called The Racial Code, and understanding systemic biases and discrimination. And in it, I've reflected that it's only probably been in the last 5 years that I've been as vocal to our execs about discrimination and biases. But it is very difficult to do that when the data isn't as available or as transparent as it should be. And it's very difficult when you have to go digging for that data, whether it's pertinent to your particular organisation or that sector. And calling it out really can be a risky procedure, can't it? Because we don't have a blameless culture. We do not, sadly, work in a system that really wants to improve itself, because if we did, supporting women, supporting people of colour would be a no-brainer, and we don't do that. So therefore, we know that the system isn't quite as receptive. And finally, I also always find that there's something, you know, when I do call it out, more in the past than now, people go, oh, you know, you're so passionate about it, rather than actually addressing the facts that I'm addressing. Or they say, oh, you know, that's quite scary when you put it like that, and the onus becomes mine to frame it in a way that is all right and acceptable. So I see analogies to the whole racism conversations that just don't happen in the way that they should. And we had COVID, and at the start of COVID we thought, oh my goodness, COVID has happened, BLM's happened, things are going to change. Well, I don't think they have. So that's a bit of a disappointment. Just to come to the point of less than full-time work as well, I think it was alluded to, Mindy, you talked about it, Chand and Claire as well. This role modelling of, oh, if you're less than full-time, and in my time, being a less than full-time trainee meant that you just weren't as committed to medicine as your generally male colleagues were. And now it's more the, oh, so can't you juggle it all? Or you know, do you have other priorities apart from work? And this is certainly a very medical narrative that we must move away from. So as soon as you have to compete with your colleagues, these inherent biases, whether or not they are true, become part and parcel of how you're seen, and therefore how you progress. And again, they're complex issues, they're cultural issues, they're systemic issues, really, really difficult to unpick.
Thank you, Daghni. And it's I think the point that Efwa makes in the chat is so crucial, isn't it? Because where she's talking about the importance and how very much we need and value male allyship in this conversation. So I know that when I was recruited to my board, I was recruited with in order to increase its diversity. So a woman and a not white woman, you know, that's very clear what part of why I was recruited. And all too often, I think it falls to me and the other not white, and I'm being purposely provocative there, the not white, not men people on the board, to be the ones who raise their voice and who who bring this to the attention of the board. And that is not a very easy place to occupy. Liz, could I invite you with your question or comment?
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. I was just going to make some comments actually from my own personal experience, which hopefully might be useful. So I'm semi-retired now. I'm a chair, consultant and coach, but I was an NHS chief executive and director. So my first director's post, I went around and did my homework, and I was told by a male colleague, if you get the job, don't accept less money, because he wouldn't offer that to a male colleague. So I did get the job and they offered me less money. So I just said, well, I'm not coming unless it's on the money that you advertise. So that was like really shocking, isn't it? But really good advice from a very supportive male colleague. When I went for my chief exec interview, so I had 4 director posts in the NHS, I prepared, I think, 3 or 4 times as hard as the male colleagues that were there. I knew the other 2 that got into the shortlist. There were 3 others. I got a coach to coach me on interview techniques. I had somebody video me so my presentation would look right, and she gave me feedback like, your head's on one side when you're talking, that's submissive behaviour. Be like a man, put your head straight up. Don't go into that submissive role. You need to be seen in the same light. So in that role, I was able to encourage female consultants. It was an NHS trust. We had no female consultants at all. And I think the point about you can't be me if you can't see me, if you haven't got senior female leadership. So I'm just talking from the perspective of the white females. So this is different than other sort of perspectives on the call. We managed to get female consultants in by, I would personally see them. We'd ask recruitment consultants to hunt them out. If they didn't get a role, we'd train people up and we'd invite them in so they would get the next role and try to get that cohort. And sort of throughout my senior NHS career, if I've been in groups of, so I went to be Chief Executive of an Academic Health Science Network, so there are 15 across the country, there were 3 women, 12 men, and that sort of remained constant, that balance throughout. I was there for 7 years. And as women, we always supported each other in meetings. So if a woman made a point and it wasn't listened to, which you'll all know that feeling, and a man comes in and makes a point and everybody said, oh yeah, that's a good point, we would support that woman. We'd pull the point out and we'd say, oh, could I hear what Zoe had to say or what Deborah had to say? Let's discuss that, and not let points get lost. So I think there's something we can do ourselves when we get into those roles, but then there's the other side of this, isn't there? How do we then look at our workforce? And I was a non-exec in an organisation that brought in a senior female leader, that she was an Asian woman, and that actually on paper looked great for us, and it, because she was very senior in the organisation, it looks like our pay differential had evened out, but we had to dig down into that and say, no, actually that's one person in a very senior role. So I think there's things we can all do personally, and in those sort of roles where we can ask the questions, and you can ask the question in a inquiring sort of way, can't you, rather than a I know it. It's like, oh, what about this? And, you know, try and do that. So I think it is a very difficult topic, but there's probably things we can all do as we move through our careers and support other women. And there's great men about it who support women. And I've had lots of mentors who are men who have been really supportive and have been prepared to like compare pay and things like that. So you can make sure that personally, as well as sort of wider, you're in the right spot to be moving on as well.
Thank you, Liz. That was really rich and full of your own experience, but also full of lots of really practical advice. And that does seem to me one of the things that we might do from this conversation and from subsequent conversations, just capturing some of that really practical, like, how do I do it then? If I'm going to be, you know, apply for one of those roles, or when I'm in one of those roles, how do I support other women to join me? What are the practical things I can do? I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I have to leave you now. Sorry about that. So it's been really great to see you all.
Really nice.
Bye.
Liz. Renata.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi. Well, I've got a comment as well, and it goes back to what Daghni was saying about being passionate. And sometimes I think, I've got no proof, but I think I've gone for jobs in the past where it's been an even playing field and we've all had the same qualifications, and I'm quite outspoken. If I if I think of something, I will say it, whether it's with whatever everyone agrees with or not. And I think sometimes my passion has been, you know, oh, she's hard work. You know, I may not have got jobs in the past because I'm deemed to be, you know, gobby or full of it, or, you know, oh, he'll be, you know, he'll be easier to work with. So I think, not that there's any proof, but I have my suspicions, and it's made me think, you know, I'm not good enough, or I can't speak well, or I'm not eloquent, or I don't have the ability to express myself without being emotional. And I've kind of got that kind of imposter phenomenon about myself now, because of constantly over the years going for jobs and never getting them. And I'm thinking now, after listening to what is being said here, maybe it's of the view that I'm just hard work compared to what else is on offer. So there we go, sorry.
Thank you, Vanessa. No, please don't be sorry, because I think I saw a lot of nodding around the room, because I think what you have said is not unfamiliar to any of us. And there is research that's categorical that the same behaviour displayed by women and displayed by men is read very differently. So a woman is seen with exactly the same behaviours as being, you know, there's much more requirement for us to be emollient, to be supportive, to play nice. And when men don't, they are not as sanctioned as women. So the research is very clear to support your experience. It doesn't make it any easier.
You know, he's a go-getter, or she's emotional, you know, that kind of thing.
Exactly. She's a ball breaker.
Yeah.
Is what you'll hear, right? I think we should wear that badge with pride, by the way. I might not say the name right, so I apologise. Morgan Barber?
It is Morgan, yeah. Morgan Baber. I mean, just to be really awkward with my surname, it's not easy. So, hi. I just wanted to kind of agree with another comment where people say, you know, actually we need male allies, but we also need female allies. We just need allies. And I think it's really hard. It doesn't matter how much you try and you're trying to do something, if the organisation you're working for isn't on board, it's probably not going to get anywhere. So what I'm feeling at the moment in my current trust is, over the last couple of years, they've put a lot of things in place for members of staff. I consider us to be a very lucky trust, because actually we're incredibly diverse, because we quite often have the people that work in the areas that we're based in. We have more local people rather than people going right into London because we're on the outskirts. So we have a good mix of people from all over the place. And in our finance department, we have a lot of female leaders, which is fantastic, but it's not always sort of borne out across the whole of the trust. And obviously women and people of colour tend to have, not obviously at all, it shouldn't be, tend to be in the lower grades, but they're trying to do something about that. And I think because it's being pushed from the top, I finally feel like maybe it will get somewhere for people. And it's like, how do we then focus attention, not just on grassroots, but actually at the top? You know, is there a way, I hate to say shame and embarrass, but maybe there is a way of doing that. There's a Twitter account, isn't there, that tweets gender pay gaps and things like that. But it's just like, how can we get execs on board with this whole idea? Because even if you've got somebody who's leading a particular division or department, actually, do they then hit a wall when they try and get, even though they're senior? And I wonder how we can get something that actually shows the benefit of having people with different characteristics, you know, because from research has shown that even from being in the womb before you're born, females are treated differently, women are treated differently. So if somebody knows that if they have a scan and they know it's a baby, the way they talk and think about their baby before it's born changes. And you have that all the way through being a baby, all the way up to adulthood. And then you're trying to fight that. Well, maybe we don't fight it. Maybe we say the benefits of having different people on your executive team, or the benefits of having people from different backgrounds, different countries, is that you have a more rounded, better offer for your population that you want to serve. And how do we do that?
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? Because what are the benefits of diversity, and particularly what does that deliver to what the organisation most values? So in the private sector, they've demonstrated that diversity leads to better shareholder value. So identifying what it is that the organisation really values, rather than what they say they value, and then demonstrating the contribution that diversity makes to achieving that goal, is one of the important things that I think we can do to advance this agenda. I've got now, I'm just sorry, going back to the chat. So Amanda, and then what I'd like to ask actually is, and Amanda, you may well be speaking to this, is what is it that we can do? How do we go from this? What is it that we need in order to close that remaining 10–13% of the gap? What is it that we need? But Amanda, that may not have been what you were going to speak about. So please, whatever your comment is, and then we'll move into.
Thank you, Mindy. I've been watching the chat, and I think it's fascinating on a number of levels. I think there is something here about the culture and the climate of the most senior team, and how they operate in work and outside of work will set the expectations of who can be a leader here and who may not fit easily and might give us harder work. So I think there's something about, you know, the responsibilities here for the board and the senior team to think about, are they allies to all people from a diverse background, and that might be gender, sexuality, race, national origin, faith background, because they are likely to want to work differently to your traditional white male. Okay, so there's something about having in our mind that if I don't look like you, if I don't live a life like you, I probably don't get how to support you to lead effectively. So I need to, as an ally, ask those questions and explore those differences. I think there is absolutely something about us as women in finding our personal power. And I run a company, and I only coach a day a week in that company because I'm MD, but I tend to work with women who are exploring their personal power, and we have to challenge the misogyny we have grown up with, you know, the babies we were wearing pink outfits and mittens, the familial expectations, all of this, and try and explore, what do I want to do, where do I want to be in life, and how am I going to get there? There is absolutely something about, we put ourselves down by looking at a job description. You know, the women I've worked with who are looking for boardroom appointments say, well, I'm not ready for that job yet because I can only do 60% of the desirable criteria. What? You know, where does this come from? Well, I need to be able to do everything. Then we can have a conversation about perfect, Petra, you know, whatever. And the men will never do this. And I tend to ask the women, if you don't apply, who will get that job? And they go, oh, he'll get it, or someone from outside will come in who've talked a good talk, and I'll have to work for them. What will it be like working for them? That's often a motivation for women to say, actually, I need to put my hat in the ring. I can do this job. I want to do this job. I don't want to work for somebody who can only do 30% of the job, turned up and took a chance. So I think there's a lot there about culture, seeking to ask questions about how we want to work and how we can work, valuing outcomes, not presence. And I think that's really tricky. And challenging ourselves to explore how we relate to those misogynistic cultures. And I would just say, finally, in my career in the public sector, up to board level as an exec and then as a non-exec, I had great support from men who came from the sort of backgrounds where they'd had a more interesting journey into the boardroom. And I didn't always have support from women, particularly because I worked full-time with young children and I was the main breadwinner, and other women in the boardrooms tended to not have those responsibilities, and they just thought women like me shouldn't be there, probably because, you know, I needed to be a better mother. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And it's a couple of things really strike me from what you've said there. One is, you know, that to be curious, to not assume that I know what it is that you need in order to express your leadership, but to be curious and to really ask and to be create a kind of a discovery process around that, because the person themselves might not know either. And secondly, that I can't remember who said it, but, you know, if we are going to remove the tyrant, we must first remove the throne from our own hearts. And that thing about, you know, our own conditioning about what we believe of ourselves and other women as women is something that we also need to be attentive to. But that is not to let anybody else off the hook, who's not a woman, by the way. Jazz, how lovely to see you.
Hello, sorry for being late. I had a previous meeting, so I could only join from 12:30 onwards, but it's been great to hear everything so far. If this has already been covered, apologies for it, but I was just going to say it's not the entire solution for gender pay gaps, but one quick tweak is when people are recruiting to not ask the question, how much were you earning at your previous role? Because the second you ask that, you assume that they'll probably only they'll be willing to accept a increase which is slightly more than that, but it's actually probably less than the market average. So just taking that out of the interview question has apparently had quite significant impacts on reducing the gender pay gap. Doesn't fix all solutions, sorry, doesn't fix all the problems, but it's one tweak that is cost-free as well.
Thank you, Jazz. Unbelievably, the time has just trickled through our fingers, and it feels like we could be spending at least another hour in this conversation. A couple of practical things strike me from the suggestions that have been made by colleagues so far. So one is that actually it wouldn't be bad, would it, to have assembled a little sheet that makes us realise that it's not just us. You know, so it's not just me who's the gobby woman, but actually that there is a gender bias about behaviour. It's not just me who is failing to advance in my career. Let's get the data that supports each of us in understanding it's not just us. You know, it's not just an individual issue. It's something that is affecting many of us. So kind of, if you like, a kind of a sort of allyship. You know, like this is, you know, like here are 10 things that will help you feel not so alone when you are experiencing it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when we are in positions which allow us to influence, what is it that we could do, as Jazz said there, what is it that we could do that would be a hand held out to help our fellow women rather than perhaps inadvertently to prevent their progress? And third, what is it that we have learnt about progressing that we could share with our colleagues who are earlier on in their careers? And what is it we have learnt that works and what doesn't work about climbing the ladder? So it feels like those would be 3 things that would be really quite useful to assemble. And if that seems a good idea, I think Jade is going to help us put together to capture some of our experience and the lessons we've learned. So we could then share that. I'm also sort of just again mindful of time, and I just wanted to once again really encourage you to invite your colleagues to join in this group. As Jade already said, you don't need to be a member of the Institute for Health and Social Care Management, although being a member does help the Institute advocate more successfully on our behalf. But you don't need to be a member. And also really mindful of those colleagues who find it more difficult to find time to participate. So what I do observe is that we have many more colleagues from the NHS field than we do from social care joining us. So what is it that we can do? How can we structure these conversations that allows everyone to create the time to be here and to get benefit? In the final few minutes, the other thing I wanted to say is that please, you know, this is the first time we've done it. So if there's anything that you thought, oh my God, that was terrible, they shouldn't do it like that again, please do let us know, because we want it to be better. So we want it, it's for all of us that it needs to work. So please do let us know what worked, what didn't work, how could we improve it for next time. And on the topic of next time, could I hand over to Jade? And perhaps, Jade, you might tell us a little bit about how the group is going to operate and some of the delicious things that you've already got lined up for us.
Thank you, Mindy.
Well, I just want to say one last thing about the fact sheet, and I think the toxicity of feeling guilty about whether it's at work or at home or in your different roles, if we could just take a slice of that guilt away from each of us, I think that would so help us progress ourselves and progress each other. Sorry, Jay.
Not at all, Daghni. Thank you for those last comments. Claire, did you want to add to that as well?
Well, I was just going to say maybe taking a slice of guilt away could be the title of the crib sheet for us, Daghni.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I'd love that. Thank you all so much for today's discussion, and thank you, Mindy, for hosting. So on the topic of our next meeting and our next event, it's on the 21st of November, again online via Teams. I've put a link in the chat so you can register for a reminder in the link. If you want to join the mailing list to receive all comms about this group going forward, you can contact me via my email address. I'll pop that in the chat again in a second. But on the 21st of November, we'll have another roundtable discussion similar to today's format on women's health and wellbeing strategy, looking at policies, frameworks, women's health hubs, advocacy, campaigning, etc. And we'll also have some panelists to share some experiences. On the 2nd of February 2023, so looking ahead to the new year, we have our first in-person event at St Thomas's Hospital in London, which will be an interview with Dame Claire Gerarda, who's president of the Royal College of General Practitioners. So that's very exciting, more details to follow. And going forward, we'll be meeting on a quarterly basis, but have lots of events built in person and online in and around those dates. More details to come, and I'll send those out to everybody that's attended today so you're aware of what's happening. And for final comments, I'll hand over to our CEO, John Wilkes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jade. Can I pay credit to Jade, please, because she's worked really hard behind the scenes to tee up a lot of the panelists today and to make sure the detail to underpin in terms of the evidence that Mindy and team have talked about has been available to the team. So thank you, Jade. You've done an absolutely first-class job in getting this group to the point that it is now, and I personally thank you. The other thing, I need to obviously thank Mindy and Claire and Chand and Daghni. You're all very, very busy people, and to give up an hour today to come and talk to our membership and tell them about your own experiences and your own perspectives and opinions is absolutely invaluable. So thank you very much. I predict that this special interest group will go on from strength to strength. I know just from listening in today that many of you have got the most fantastic experiences, and I also love the fact that it's such a supportive environment in which to discuss your own experiences and opinions. So long may that continue. But for today, I'm going to wish you all well. Thank you very much. Have a super week, all of you, and we'll hope to see you all in November. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Mindy.